Thanks for joining us. I'm Matt Reed, and today we tackle Brevard County government with someone who knows a thing or two about that, County Commission Chairman Chuck Nelson. Commissioner Nelson and his 4 colleagues make critical decisions every week regarding your taxes, law enforcement, libraries, parks, mosquito control, and the shape of Brevard County's growth and development for years to come. A resident of Merritt Island, Commissioner Nelson represents District 2, which includes Merritt Island as well as Cocoa Beach, Cape Canaveral, and Patrick Air Force Base. Also joining us is Florida Today editorial page editor John Glisch, who has no shortage of opinions on how this county ought to be run. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Matt.
While we suffer no shortage of headlines about county issues, whether it's a crisis in the Animal Services Department, a shortage of lifeguards, the running off of a county manager, and the controversy over the price of environmentally sensitive lands. But Chuck, what I'd like to know from you is if you could name the 1 or 2 most urgent and important issues that you are going to be contending with long term as a county commissioner.
Well, I think, first and foremost, the budget. This is our 3rd year of reductions. My first year in office was tax reform, 2nd year was Amendment 1, and this year is declining property value and a poor economy. And so certainly dealing with the budget has been the number 1 challenge that we've had. I also think as part of that, how we deal with the budget in terms of the monies that we do have, those that were committed through a variety of sources, whether it be the Endangered Lands Program, our road construction dollars. So number 1 would be, I think, our budget. Number 2, I think, is growth. We have a commission that is changing. The previous commission, many veterans, are veterans of many years, and an understanding, I think, that was much greater. So what we're dealing with now is a learning curve of basically 2 commissioners with 2 years and 3 new commissioners. So it's an interesting time for us.
Is now the time to invest in things like roads and other projects that cost a lot of money, or is now the time to retrench?
Interestingly enough, there was an article in Florida Trend, and there was a quote by the mayor of Jacksonville who said, "Now's not the time for survivalist thinking." And what we're finding is that we're able to now get value for our projects that we haven't seen in many, many years. During the boom times, we weren't able to afford to do the projects. Everything was too expensive. But now is a great time. Land prices have come down dramatically. Cost of materials have come down, and people are wanting to work. So for us, infrastructure and land acquisitions, this is a good time.
Chuck, before you were elected as a county commissioner, you worked for the county parks department,
Yes.
running the parks and recreation for some 15 years. And that department was not without its controversies at time. How has your experience as a county employee affected your outlook and how you run things as an elected policymaker?
It's been interesting for me from the perspective that Parks and Recreation is so diverse, and because we were so involved in construction, we got involved in almost every aspect of county government. So it was a great training ground for me. What I also bring to the table is an understanding of how the parts fit together. So the discussions that I'm able to have with staff start at a much higher level, I think, than you might otherwise expect. And they also understand that I do know how the system works. And so it's a very straightforward, honest kind of relationship.
John, one of the things that Commissioner Nelson and I believe it was Commissioner Mary Bowen promised when they were elected was a little bit more civility on the board. It seems like Brevard County Commission has a reputation for some crazy politics at times. How would you rate the tone and the politics on the county government side now?
I think the tone has improved significantly over the last few years, and frankly, I think Commissioner Nelson is responsible for helping achieve that. I think that's very, very important because the issues that the Commission is dealing with are just absolutely so critical, and I don't think it can be overstated as to how critical the decisions they are making right now are. When you look at kind of the three-year chunk, last year, this year's budget, and what's potentially coming next year, it's going to have a real long-term effect on the quality of life that Brevardians have come to expect and enjoy. And it's also going to be really, really essential to economic development efforts as we head toward this post-shuttle world. It's encouraging to hear the commissioner say things like, this is an opportunity now. We have to look at this also as an opportunity to invest in infrastructure, because the kinds of key services, public services, that the county provides, certainly with roads, police, fire, parks, recreation. Those are things that companies really look at in terms of when they're thinking of starting here or relocating here. I mean, what's it like to live? That's a big piece of that equation, along, of course, with school and economic incentive packages. So what they're doing right now is really, really, it just is going to have long-term repercussions for the future of the county.
Well, the County Commission voted 5-3 on July 28th to freeze its tax rate, which, when applied to lower property values, will reduce the county's tax revenue next year from $208 million to $183 million. That's a $25 million drop. Chuck, you're a Republican, yet you voted against freezing that tax rate. Why?
Well, first of all, although it was portrayed as a tax increase, we were in effect discussing, do we reduce the budget by 30 million or 40 billion? So the reduction was going to be significant under any circumstance. We had not nailed down some of the bigger issues. Are we going to fund first responders, and if so, from where? And are we going to fully fund the Economic Development Commission or do reductions? We have now placed ourselves where we have no flexibility. We can only go down from this point in time, and I think it would have been, from my perspective, helpful to have the ability to massage that based on our decision making. So it's going to be a challenge now for us with no room.
For the taxpayers sitting at home watching this program, how do you anticipate their experiences are going to change under this budget?
The tax structure in the state of Florida is basically broken, to be honest with you, because every year there are winners and losers. And this year the winners will be in the business community and those who bought during the boom. They're going to see declining values of their properties, and as a result they'll have a reduction. Longtime residents like myself will be seeing no savings because we adopted the same millage this year as we had last year. My property values have actually gone up just slightly because of the recapture rule. And I'll see $40 million worth of cuts, but I'll pay the same as I paid last year. And so it's going to be an interesting discussion when the tax bills come out about where are my savings, because people will see their reduction in service.
John, I mentioned earlier and voted against freezing the tax rates. Politically, what kind of heat do you think Chuck's going to face when it comes to maybe a 30-second soundbite or a 15-second soundbite next election cycle?
Well, making difficult decisions, making unpopular decisions, are often means making the right decisions and leaving options open. And I think certainly he'll be criticized for doing that. But again, getting back to the point I was making earlier about just where the county sits now and where we're at economically, commissioners really need to kind of dispense with any type of their philosophical theologies, as it were. I think they need to have an open mind and go into all of these discussions being willing to listen to good ideas and realistic ideas. One of the things we had mentioned just recently in the editorial that we had written about the new county manager that you folks recently hired was that we hope that he has the willingness and the backbone to tell commissioners not just what they want to hear, but what they need to hear, no matter how unwelcome that may be. Now, when you were searching for that candidate, that was something you'd put in the job description, so we certainly hope you follow through. This is a very, very kind of convulsive time, certainly nationally with the economy and in Brevard County too. And so I think it's really, really imperative that commissioners just kind of keep their eyes wide open on all of the possibilities that could help make for a stronger Brevard in the future.
Voting with a majority, Commissioner Trudy Infantini said, "I have told taxpayers I will not increase the taxes when they're losing their jobs. It's not the time to take from Peter to pay Paul. It's time to cut it off." What does that mean?
You might have to ask Trudy to find out exactly, but what I see is a sincere desire on her part to hold down spending, and I think we all have that same desire. The question is, what are our priorities? And there are ways of doing it. We could cut our road programs. That would be a reduction in spending, but that is a high priority. I think the other misconception is that, first of all, none of the current commissioners were here during the boom. We all came in after that. So whatever sins may or may not have been committed, we weren't part of. But what we have seen is a reduction with the additional almost 200 positions this year. We will reduce 400 positions in 3 years, and that is significant. And we're seeing funding levels that actually for many of the departments are below the 2002 to 2003 levels. But we did make some good decisions because we hired additional correctional officers for the jail, and we've reduced overcrowding. We added a route to the bus loop, which has actually increased ridership. We put some money towards some of our social service needs. So I think we did some reprioritization. That part I think was very good.
Another major decision in the news, the hiring of a new county manager. After a nationwide search, commissioners voted to hire Howard Tipton, who has worked for the past 11 years as Chief Administrative Officer with the Orange County Clerk of Courts. Before that, I believe Tipton worked as a Deputy County Administrator in Orange County. Chuck, why him?
Well, I felt that he possessed all the skills that we needed for Brevard County. I think he's got a sincere drive to do a good job. He's been involved in the Sterling process in Orlando with the clerk of the courts there. He just brings a lot of good experience. As much as I like some of the things we heard from some of the business community, we are in a complicated business of our own, and Brevard actually has one of the most complicated budgets in the state of Florida because of the special districts and sources. And I think he brings the ability to that to manage it because of his understanding of how the pieces fit together.
John, Mr. Tipton said he plans to spend his first 6 months developing a strategic plan. What do you make of that?
Well, that's absolutely essential for all the reasons we've been talking about trying to get this really, in many ways, a rookie board. I mean, you've got some years under your belt, but a lot of the others don't within the economic dynamic that exists. When he accepted the job, he said this was his dream job, and we commented in Editorial, we hope the heck he still feels that way in 6 months, because he has a very, very rough road ahead. And the size of the budget and the size of the number of employees that he dealt with in Orange County is quite a bit lower than what he's dealing with now here in Brevard County, with maybe as many as 2,000 employees, $1 billion budget. It's a big step up. So when you take that big step up and you add with it trying to figure out how do you navigate through the economy and the budget with the political dynamic of the 5 commissioners, he's got his hands full, that's for sure.
Well, Florida Today's last report on contract negotiations put Tipton's compensation package in the range of $140,000 to $200,000. Let's move on to another topic that I think that you've been very centrally involved with. I want to go back to November 2006 when Commissioner Nelson was first elected. The economy was a little different then, and when asked to identify a top issue, he told Florida Today, quote, "We need to deal with the growth issue, and it's going to be a long-term effort, and we need to make sure our planning staff is up to the challenge. It's critical that we complete our comprehensive plan." Chuck, obviously the economy has turned around a little bit since that time. How do you square your outlook then with what we're contending with now?
I don't know that it's really changed that dramatically, because I still think that the guiding document is the comprehensive plan. We're going to be going through a process to review and amend that. Not all parts of it are up to date or in some cases even make sense, but I think it's still a good guiding document. I also think the concept of how we grow is changing. Trying to encourage redevelopment over new development, I think, is something that we need to focus and create the ability and really the desire for business to do that. Because right now it's easier to develop raw land than it is to redevelop existing land because of codes, and we need to look at what we could do to improve their willingness to take that on.
John, do you think that the upcoming vote next November on the hometown democracy proposal, the one that would put any change to a comprehensive plan up for a public vote, could restrict growth? What do you think is going to happen with that and our outlook on growth?
Sure. I think it has a real chance of passing, and I think you see that in a number of ways. Just the people here haven't forgot what life was like in Brevard County and around Florida when things were booming just a few years ago. So there's a lot of strong sentiment out there to try to get more local control on growth. So I think it's got a very good chance of passing. And you're also seeing that with a column you wrote recently that's showing how the big landholders are really hustling now to try to get changes passed in comp plans that benefit them, so that if hometown democracy passes, they're locked in and good to go. In terms of that amendment and all the votes that would be necessary, it could be a nightmare for people like Commissioner Nelson and other, and really hurt growth. One other thing on the growth issue is that the Brevard County Commission, all county commissions in Florida and local governments really got shanghaied by the legislature this session when they gutted 25 to 30 years of growth management laws. And what that is going to mean is that local taxpayers are going to get stuck with the bill for a lot more growth when it comes down the road. One example was the long-term negotiations that the county had with the Viera Company over West Viera. I think you folks were saying that their share of what was really needed to help pay for roads was like around $100 million. They fought that for a long time and finally settled on about 70. So that's just 70 million, 75 million, $100 million that they would be contributing toward paying for roads as a consequence of their development. Those are the kind of bills that taxpayers in Brevard County are going to get stuck with down the road. One last quick thought. If history has shown anything in Florida, it's that bad times don't last forever. And when the bad times are over, growth is going to return. And in Florida, growth always comes at you like a Cat 5 hurricane.
Chuck, your take on what John just said. Do you feel shanghaied?
Well, absolutely. I think that they took a butcher knife to something that needed a scalpel. There were parts of the growth management plan that needed to be updated, but they basically gutted it, and it's really inconsistent. You know, Brevard County itself, for instance, is still subject to concurrency, but small cities within the county are not, and there were just all sorts of problems throughout it. But the hometown democracy initiative is a result of the fact that the voters don't trust their elected officials. That truly is what it comes down to, that they don't believe we have made good decisions. And I said the same to at our workshop that we had with all the cities and the counties, is that we have got to do a better job of talking through these issues because we're not trusted to vote on these things.
Well, those of you who read my column know I have a thing for freedom of information, so I've been tough on Commissioner Nelson and his peers on a couple of occasions for working in secret or enabling secrecy while pursuing an otherwise worthy goal, recruiting new business and industry to Brevard County. Chuck, you have the floor. Defend that approach.
Well, I think that, first of all, the economic development arena is extremely competitive, and state law does allow county commissioners to have discussions independently, certainly not as a group, with the potential candidates to move to Brevard County. In the case of Embraer, we never reached a point where we were committing the county to any particular course of action that would not have to be vetted out in public. And that's what made me feel comfortable with the fact that we could get them to the table. And frankly, had we not approached it that way, they would be somewhere else. But they've broken ground now in Melbourne. They're going to bring 200 jobs, and I'm proud of that. I really think that there are controls in place that don't let us give away things off camera, if you will.
Noted. John, do you think they've been successful so far in those kinds of business recruitment efforts?
It's really, really tough, and when it comes to government in the sunshine, I'm really kind of an absolutist on that front. I think when things go on behind closed doors that people don't know, it creates even more mistrust and the potential for all kinds of shenanigans that people would not otherwise know about. On the other hand, people like Commissioner Nelson are in a difficult position because the economic development world is so incredibly competitive in Florida and nationally, and so the kinds of mechanisms that he's talking about, he can make a legitimate case that within a very narrow framework, it's legitimate and necessary to do to try to reach a point where you can bring these things out in the open and cut a deal. I still, though, will lean toward doing everything out there in the open and letting the taxpayers and the public know what's going on, certainly.
Chuck, I'm going to put you on the spot. Are you going to run for re-election?
Right now, I'm focusing on the budget, and I don't want that to get in the way of the decision, but I certainly am leaning that direction.
Work left to be done?
Yes, there is. This is a great place to live, and I think that I and all my commissioners take this very seriously, and I particularly, my district is in some ways unique with the port, with the Air Force Base, so I've enjoyed it, and I'd like to continue that.
Well, that's our program. My thanks to Brevard County Commissioner Chuck Nelson for sharing his insight on county government. Thanks also to my colleague John Glisch, always strong on views on local issues. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I'm Matt Reed. We'll see you right here next Wednesday on WBCC and FloridaToday.com.